start the process, I'm just going to do a light and basic drawing of the mountains and draw in some areas where the trees are. Remember to keep it very basic. The larger mountain has a ridge in it that comes towards you, so I'm just drawing a line there to remind me when I'm painting that that's where my ridge line is. And when I draw in the tree shapes, I'm just drawing the tree line in the distance, and then as I come forward where the trees become more pronounced, I'm just drawing in straight lines just to indicate that there's a tree living there. No detail at this point. I'm using a number 10 brush to fill in my sky with clean water. You don't have to worry about getting the water into your mountain shape, not a big deal. You don't have to be exactly precise. And the water consistency here is that the sky is completely wet, but there aren't any major puddles. Now I'm going into this light blue color and creating myself a watery little mix, a puddle here, and I'll just swipe that right into the sky. Not a lot of detail, not a lot of paint, just letting it flow into that water. Now I'm also going to add this kind of brownish purpley color that I'm in love with from this palette. A very light consistency of it, and also sweeping it right into that blue of the sky. Now I'm going back into that light blue color, just a watery mix of it, and I'm applying it to the left side of my mountains. So where I drew that ridge line, I'll take this blue color and swipe it from that ridge line down into the bottom of the mountain. I'm now going to take my brush and kind of pull that wetness and color right down into the tree line. I'm now taking a smaller brush. This is maybe a 4 or a 6, and I'm going into this greenish, deep green, kind of evergreen color, and I'm just going to start adding some color to my tree line. Remember, these trees are far, far away, so not a lot of detail here. And because I have wet that area right at the top of the tree line, the paint, when it hits that water, is going to start to diffuse, and that's exactly what we want. So just adding some different colors of green here, letting the water flow and go where it wants to go. Don't worry about details at this point. Now I'm going back to my larger brush that has just a little bit of water on it, and I'm going to start to pull that color down into that misty, foggy area. So just grabbing a little water at the time and pulling that color down into the mist and fog. After adding a little of that blue color, I'm using my larger brush here to add droplets of water right to the edge of where the forest meets the fog. And what happens is that water will start to push into that paint. And then I'll use my paper towel here to just kind of blot those edges where that mist and fog is happening. While you've been working on your tree line, you've given the mountain area time to dry a bit. So now I'm going into that brownish purpley color, and I'm going to start defining my mountain shape. If you start to add paint and it starts to diffuse too much, then it's still too wet. You'll need to give it more time to dry. I'm painting in abstract shapes that will eventually give shape and form to this mountain. I'm using the negative space, the places that I don't paint, to signify the snow on the mountain. So the parts that I am painting in are the mountain showing through the snow. You want to go light on your paint here. You don't want to make it too dark too quickly. You can always come back and add a little more shading and shadow if you need to. So keep your paint color light. My shapes are just basically following the slope of the mountain, and then you'll also want to keep that ridge in mind. So you'll have slope going to the left on the left side of the ridge and then going to the right on the right side of the ridge. It's definitely best not to get too caught up on details. Remember, this mountain is far away. You want just basic shapes, so don't overdo. Now I'm using my larger brush again to add water all the way down to the bottom of the page. So from the tree line all the way down. I don't want the paper to be too wet, so no puddles, but I definitely want to make sure that it's shiny and wet. Now I'm going to use my smaller brush to add some of those misty trees that are in the middle ground. So I'm taking my evergreen color here, and once I apply the fully loaded brush to this wet paper, you can see how it just kind of bursts onto the wet page, and that's exactly what you want it to do. Remember at this point that you're just putting in basic tree shapes. Don't try to get too detailed at this point. The paper is wet, so you're not going to be able to add a lot of detail. You just want to put in the vague shape of some misty trees. So go around to all the areas of your paper where you want to have trees in, and go ahead and put that paint onto that wet paper. Once I put in some of those mid-ground trees, I'm now using a larger brush to pull in some color to this foreground. So I'm just grabbing random colors, making random abstract shapes down here in the foreground, just to add some visual interest to this area, make it look like there's a forest coming through that fog and mist. You want to go fairly light with your colors, and once again, definitely don't worry about details too much at this point. Once everything is dry, I can start to add some more details to my painting. I'm using my smaller brush and my reddish brown purpley color to add just a hint more shadow onto the left side of my mountain. Now I'm going to use my secret mist and fog maker, which is basically this very cheap, flat, kind of hard bristled brush. It's not right like super firm, but it's definitely more firm than a normal watercolor brush. So what I'm doing here is adding water to the brush and then kind of scrubbing at the paper a bit right along that tree line. You don't want to overdo this. If you scrub too much, you're going to mess up the fibers of your paper. So be gentle with it. And once I scrub out a bit, then I take a paper towel and blot off where I've scrubbed. Now I'm going back to my smaller brush to add details to those mid-ground trees, using the same evergreen colors and just adding details right on top of the misty shapes that I already have. Now I'm doing the same process in the foreground that I did in the midground. So I'm wetting the page a bit, and then I'll start to add basic shapes of these larger trees. So my colors are going to burst into that water and give vague shapes. I'll let them dry, and then I can add more detail. The final touch is to use my scrubber brush again, just to go over some of those little minor details and add a little more mist and fog to the area.